Hello out there to the liveactionanime.org forums. I am Thrash Till Death once again, and I'm here today to bring you my verdict on the live-action adaptation of Blood the Last Vampire. If you missed my first review on the Blood the Last Vampire OVA, directed in 2000 by Hiroyuki Kitakuba, I was a great admirer of it. It was extremely skillful in its establishment of an extremely dark, very surreal, sort of Lovecraftian atmosphere, and it was very effective in its sort of subversion of the everyday and creating a very horrific, grim vibe. However, one thing it essentially lacked was a narrative. At only 48 minutes long, it only sort of established the very basics of its world, and many things were hinted at but never fully explained of a larger context in which the action took place. Now we have Chris Nahon's adaptation, a French-Japanese venture, and it essentially takes the events of the original OVA and with double the running time tries to place them within a broader context and give more reason, more motivation for Saya's actions. So whether or not that's a good idea is essentially up for you to decide, but for what it sets out to do, this film does do a fairly good job of it, although it is definitely flawed. The story goes that there's been a centuries-long war being waged between demons, bloodsuckers, and this shady organisation known as the Council. Now, the Council has been working for this long time trying to keep the demons at bay, trying to keep their existence from the general human populace unknown. And to this end, they've also got one half-demon, or vampire, known as Saya. And she's a centuries-old sort of half-demon. Her mother was a demon, her father was human, and she's out for revenge against the being known as Onigen, who is the oldest and most powerful of all the demons. And this film essentially charts her quest in the, well, not quite the modern day, in 1970s during the Vietnam War. In Japan, she's setting out to find Onigen and essentially kill her to take revenge for what she's done to her in the past. Now, those of you expecting a particularly complex narrative are going to be let down here. Blood the Last Vampire, as interpreted by Chris Nahon, is essentially just the hardcore action movie sort of film that he's associated with himself in the past. But for what that it intends to do, it's actually a fairly accomplished bit of filmmaking with some flaws but also some surprising strengths. For one thing, the fight scenes are very accomplished. There's maybe 4 or 5 major action set pieces over the course of the film, and thanks to director of action Corey Yuen, who's one of the big names in sort of Hollywood and Hong Kong action choreography, a lot of them are very dynamic in their conception and very skillful in their execution. There's all sorts of very bloody fights between Saya and a variety of demons. There's some extremely entertaining chase sequences. There's one sequence that's almost a total reboot of the climax of the first OVA, where Saya's on a jeep trying to chase down a flying demon that's right on the tail of a plane. And that does make for some pretty exhilarating viewing. Also, quite surprisingly, a mark in this film's favour is the performance of the lead actress Gianna Jun, who plays Saya. And while it wouldn't exactly be accurate to say her portrayal of Saya is three-dimensional, exactly, she does strike a very clever note between sort of the vulnerability of the character and also her coolness factor. And that gives you a very likeable character who you can get behind and sort of empathise with, even if she's not the sort of deepest character around. Generally speaking, the film's pretty well paced as an action movie. It's only an hour and a half long, of course, which is twice as long as the original OVA, but still fairly lenient by modern movie-making standards. And it's fairly tightly plotted. Apart from one overlong sequence of flashbacks, and with the notable exception of the final confrontation with Onigen, which just sort of blindsides you out of nowhere and sort of leaves you feeling, what the fuck was that, afterwards. But generally speaking, it's pretty well paced. It doesn't mess around like some other movies that you can see in the cinema these days, and it delivers exactly what the audience is wanting without too much padding. However, the screenplay, actually my first and biggest complaint about this film would probably have to be, and this is for a film made in 2009, this is pretty much just inexcusable. The special effects are absolutely god-awful. You have these... one thing that's extremely pervasive throughout the whole film is Chris Nahon's insistence on massive CGI trails of blood every time Saya deals someone serious injury. And these things look extremely fake, and they're just not particularly welcome. They just get in the way of the action. And I honestly wish that they'd just go back to using blood squibs rather than the CGI nonsense, because it's not really wanted and it doesn't really add anything to the action stylistically or otherwise. Also, there's one sequence or two where you see humans, or rather demons in their human form, transforming back into demons. And this, it's just woeful, I swear to God. I remember the first time I saw it happening, and I remember lightning fast the sort of sequence of thoughts went through my brain. Oh God, where have I seen this before? Oh shit, it was Mortal Kombat Annihilation, wasn't it? It really is pretty much indefensible that CGI this bad could be in a film in this day and age. Also, another flaw I'd like to point out, the screenplay is pretty wooden, quite stilted in places. A lot of the dialogue's very repetitious. I think at least 3 times Onigen gets referred to as the oldest, most vile of the demons, and that's quoted verbatim at least 3 times throughout the film. And although the actors and actresses do a pretty good job of what they are trying to do with the script that they're given, Chris Nahon, the original OVA I was a great admirer of, largely due to the direction. It was extremely cleverly shot, a lot of still shots, a lot of very clever lighting, I guess you could call it, within the medium of animation, which gave the sort of vibe of sort of subversion and the sort of uneasiness that just is pervasive throughout the entire production. And Chris Nahon's direction, unfortunately, doesn't really preserve that. He goes for more the kineticism that you would associate with an action film. And I do understand that this film is aiming for something different from the original OVA, but when you consider that a lot of the actual shots in this film are actually lifted verbatim from the original OVA, including the opening sequence on the train and the aforementioned chase sequence where Saya is hunting down the flying demon, it does seem sort of to ring sort of hollow when you're watching that, when it lacks the sort of same surreal, menacing vibe that the original OVA had. Altogether, this film is not the sort of mainstream breakthrough that live-action anime movies need at this point. It is definitely a niche appeal. It is sort of aiming out to the hardcore action crowd or the fans of the original OVA, because it is sort of... it's very weighted towards that sort of audience. The action is... the story even. The story isn't really compelling enough, or the characters really deep enough to reach out anywhere beyond its intended target audience. But for what it delivers, for the sort of thrill seekers who want to see just girls carving up vampires and demons and all of it done in sort of dark, stylistic 300-esque lighting, this film delivers, and it doesn't sort of mess about. It knows what its audience is after. So if you're sort of after this sort of disposable, hyper-violent entertainment, then yeah, you could do a lot worse than Chris Nahon's adaptation of Blood the Last Vampire. It could have done more with the material, I think, but it is sort of, as a fan of the original OVA, it is sort of exciting to see that the things that the original OVA hinted at being applied on a larger scale. And so yeah, you could do a lot worse in the action stakes right now than to go and watch Blood the Last Vampire, the movie. So yeah, on the 4-star scale, I reckon it gets maybe a 2.5. Yes, a fairly strong 2.5. That's a decent recommendation for what it is. It's fairly disposable. It's It's what my mother would probably refer to as a load of tosh, but you know, it's enjoyable tosh. And yeah, if you like that sort of thing, then go ahead, go and watch it. As for now, we're still waiting for a real masterpiece to come out of live action anime adaptations, but finally Hollywood, or rather France, even, but it's still a Western cinema, so you get my drift. It has managed to come out with a decent bit of filmmaking that does succeed moderately in entertaining its audience. So yeah, this film does get a fairly reserved recommendation from me. So that's me for the moment. I'm Thrashed Till Death, and I'll be seeing you again soon, hopefully. I'm out for now. Goodbye.